I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. So, I want everybody to close their eyes for a sec. Just take a deep breath, close your eyes, sit back, we're all friends here. What is your ideal role in your company? What's the impact that you're having? And how are you spending your time? Just think about it for a couple seconds. Got it? Okay, you can open your eyes. We're often told one of the best ways to get to where we want is by having a sponsor. Someone who can help you rise up, someone who can help you speak on your behalf, someone who can help you navigate through organizational challenges, someone who can recommend you for certain projects, etc., and help you move up quickly, easily, and elegantly. But what happens when you don't have that person? Can you move up just as quickly and easily if you didn't have someone speaking on your behalf? I'm Shanea Leven, and this is my family. I recently got married, so I have a couple of wedding pictures in here. But our careers are really, really personal to us. So in order to talk about my career, I have to talk about where I came from and all of the things surrounding all of the escalations through my career. Neither of my biological parents finished college. So at 16, I wanted to be a professional dancer. I wanted to go to Broadway, I wanted to do ballet, I was part of a company. But my parents said I couldn't do that, obviously. Needed to make money. So it was either college or military school. And I chose college because military school, I don't like their outfits. So I had no other examples of what I wanted to be, so I was pretty aimless. I got into my top school, early decision, and I was on my way ready to go. And then my parents couldn't afford to send me. So then I had to start all over again, and I was aimless again. So I got another school, which was open April of my senior year of high school. And luckily I had the grades to get in. So I went there, and I took an incredibly general major because I didn't know what I wanted to do. But this school wasn't an easy journey. So a year and a half in, my boyfriend actually was moving to California, and I decided to go with him. I decided to drop out, and 6 years without a college degree. I was pretty aimless still, wasn't making much progress. I was a temp, I was a receptionist, a data entry specialist. I worked at a staffing agency for a long time, and then I worked at a marketing agency, and during the crash, I delivered singing cookie telegrams to businesses all around Los Angeles. But then in 2013, something changed. And over the course of the next 6 years, I had clear direction and made tremendous progress. And fast forward to 2019, and today I'm a founder, very exciting, of a company called CodeC, where we visualize code bases for planning, development, and organization. And most recently, I was the senior director of product at Docker. And I've done lots of different things. I've worked at Google, I've helped millions of people develop Android applications, I've worked on developer APIs, I've helped make money for eBay and all kinds of folks. But what changed? What was the difference? So I became my own sponsor. I didn't know it at the time, but I did. And I stopped waiting for someone to help me move up, and I started doing things on my own. So it all started one summer, and I thought that I had found my calling as an analyst. I was working at a company, and a friend of mine wanted to move back to the Bay Area. And she comes and she bursts in and says, "Oh, I have a voicemail from a recruiter that you have to listen to." And I'm like, okay, totally fine. 2 weeks after I help her, recruiter calls and says, "I've got the perfect role for you." Oh, and by the way, the company was Google. And I flip out. I was like, what? What do you mean? Google at the time in 2013 was the mecca of companies. It was like one of those magical places that only like the most elite geniuses can go. And if she could do it, so can I. And I thought that that was the door that I wanted to open. That was the thing that I wanted. And I set my sight on it. So I asked my friend, could I have like the recruiter's phone number? Could I just like talk to him? Just try to figure out if he has some other jobs. And then I stalk him. I literally stalked him. I emailed him, I called him 5 times, I left him countless voicemails, and I worked with him. He finally ended up calling me back. And I worked with him over and over and over again. And he helped me apply to 4 different positions. Didn't get into Google on my first shot. Applied to 4 different roles. Finally, I got a phone call and an on-site interview. And I studied every waking minute for that interview. It was the only thing that I wanted. And when I mean that, I memorized 75 behavioral and analytical and technical answers to questions. I had a framework for how to answer questions when I didn't know how to answer the question. I wake up in the morning on my commutes, in between breaks, I would just say things out loud and practice on whiteboards. And so on the phone interview, there was a question about how would I redesign one of the Google's websites. And I wasn't actually happy with my answer, so I brought in a presentation of how I would redesign the website to my on-site interview. I wanted to make sure that Google knew that I was the right candidate. So this was my very, very messy version of my 3-step process that I've come to refine over time that helped me consistently and seamlessly get me to where I want to go without a sponsor. And those 3 things are knowing the terrain, knowing how to open doors, and knowing what to do when you run face first into a glass door. So step 1, know the terrain. Always know how to get to the next step. So knowing the terrain is about thinking about that future role. Maybe it's the role that you imagined earlier. And what are the skills and what are the perceptions that people will have about me to get to that next role. So I'll give you an example. A year ago, I decided that I wanted to try something new, and I started to look for VP roles. So I turned my in-real-life stalking to LinkedIn stalking. And basically what I did is I took 50 job descriptions and profiles of VPs, and I noted all the requirements down in a spreadsheet. I wrote down all of the accomplishments, all the words that they used, all of the nuances that they put, all of the data, all of the things that they were talking about. Then I checked off in my own experiences the things that I could actually talk about that would help me craft that story of why I would be a good candidate. And then I had a bunch of gaps. So then I went on informational interviews, and I started talking to people to fill in those specifics. So as a side note, I recommend going on informational interviews every 6 months. It takes a lot of time, it's really annoying, but it helps you to really understand, are you actually on the right track to get to that next level? Are you on the right track to frame your stories? And talking to other people can help you come up with the words to actually tell your story in a coherent way. So through this 2-pronged approach, LinkedIn stalking and informational interviews, I had a very clear understanding of the terrain, and it was very clear to me that what I needed to do to get to where I wanted to go. So then, to fill in my gaps, I went to my boss, and I said, here are the projects that I would like to take on, and here's how it will help me fill in the gaps and to come up with my own personal growth plan. Right? It's really, really hard to understand how to create a plan and a growth plan for yourself if you haven't really understood the terrain and what people are actually looking for. So if your boss, going to your boss isn't a possibility, you can go to another department, you can take on a side project, you can invest in a small project outside of work. Maybe it's like partnering with like another engineering counterpart for those PMs in the room, or like an engineering student, et cetera, et cetera. But figure out ways to test how you can fill in those gaps that you know people are going to ask. Now, this process works at any level, whether you're just starting out or you're mid-career or you're in an executive role. And it's simple, but what I find is that when we're not intentional, we basically are letting Y happen to us when we really want X to happen. So by knowing the terrain, you can then find shortcuts. So for example, how many of you guys are PMs in the room? All of you. Okay, great. So as PMs, we come up with this question of how technical do we need to be? And has anyone grappled with that question? Yes? Anybody? Okay, cool. So most of us, the perception is, I should be technical, right? But what actually does that mean? What does that mean, right? So a lot of us go through this like question of, should I go to like a boot camp, or should I go to get a CS degree, or should I get a master's degree? Like, how do I show how technical I should be, right? So I had that question as well. So I studied the terrain, and what I found is that having the CS degree is the fastest way to get you to having that technical label. It doesn't make you any, like, it helps you, but it's the fastest way, right? And so, but who has time to go back to school for 4 years? Nobody, right? So I went back and I did more research, and I really tried to figure it out. Well, what was I to do? So turns out you can get a second bachelor's degree. Does anybody know that? No? People look at me like they're crazy, like I'm crazy. So a second bachelor's degree is if you have a bachelor's degree already, you can get a second one, and you only have to take your core classes. You only have to take the core classes. However, there's a trick. California doesn't do second bachelor's degrees. Why? Funding. No other reason. So you can actually just get a second bachelor's degree from a different state and take it online. So now I have a CS and a business degree. And that's helped me tremendously. So the second step is learning how to open the doors when you get there. So once you know the terrain, the next step is actually opening the door itself. And the two most powerful keys that I personally found is communication and confidence. So for me, without a sponsor, books have become game changers to learning how to open your doors, particularly when trying to communicate. If you're in your mid-career, you start moving from those technical on-the-ground skills to being able to vocalize and communicate and bring people along on visions with you. So communication is incredibly important. We often take books for granted, but they've equipped me with a lot of skills and a lot of difficult situations, and essentially books have been my sponsors. So a couple of years ago, I had a terrible manager, as I'm sure many of us have all had not great managers at some point in our careers, and kind of felt lost on like how to handle the situation. So my husband actually recommended that I read the book Crucial Conversations. And if you're in your mid-career, Crucial Conversations is incredibly amazing as you start to get into management, you start to get into leadership. Having really difficult conversations tactfully is an executive skill. It completely changed my life. I became much more equipped to handle those conversations than I ever was before. When I started receiving terrible feedback, sometimes completely false feedback from a manager, thanks for your feedback became my savior, essentially. When I started giving feedback to my direct reports, it allowed me to be on the flip side and really understand what those dichotomies are of giving impactful, actionable feedback. When I experienced organ rejection at a company, Master Your Next Move, which is a follow-up to the first 90 days, was incredibly helpful. Just as important as communication, verbal communication, written communication is also just as important. So right to the top, book written in the 90s, super helpful, still relevant, et cetera, et cetera. And for those of you who are moving from early career to mid-career to executive levels, What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith, super helpful if you haven't read it. It basically helps you to take a step back and not really think about like, I need to be the center of attention, but how do you drum up that leadership and that vision? So communication skills have taken me far, but so is building my confidence. We often hear that it's important to have confidence, but it took me a while to truly understand what that means. So a few years ago, I had 2 job interviews in the same day. Also highly recommend that you do that as well. Having maybe like a phone interview that you don't care about to get kind of the baubles out. They actually do this in sales training, right? You practice before you do anything, right? A couple of interviews in the same day. First company was I was too overqualified. Then second company, I was totally underqualified. It was a job that I really, really wanted, a company I was really excited about. I'm like, I'm the same person. I have the exact same experience for a similar level. What's the difference? In the first interview, I took bold questions. I drilled the head of product, and I just started asking all of these questions that you probably shouldn't answer or shouldn't ask them. And she said, well, you deserve to be a head of product somewhere. And I was like, that's interesting. Okay, feedback noted. And then the second one, I was so nervous that I completely blacked out. Like I couldn't get basic words out because I really, really wanted the job, right? And that was a big moment for me. I realized that having the confidence, even if I'm not confident, is incredibly helpful. So I became determined to have that feeling of confidence even when I'm not in situations that terrify me, kind of like a couple of, like this one, for example. So once again, I turned to books. I read the Confidence Code. And the thing that I love about the Confidence Code is that it really taught me to do one thing, which is, again, changing my life: ask bold questions. So, for example, I was at a Women in Product conference. If you don't know, it's an organization of like 17,000 women in product globally. And one of the female VPs of product who works at Facebook was speaking. And I'm determined to ask like bold questions. I'm like determined to like go and do this new mantra that I have. So I stand up and I say, what are you doing about people with unconventional backgrounds in product? And Deb Blue was incredibly graceful and poised, as you know, if you've ever met her or seen one of her talks, she is. But again, completely black out. And the only reason that I know that I asked the question is because a friend recorded it. I had no idea. And so she was absolutely amazing. But I couldn't stop thinking like, oh my God, I got this question out. And it was really, really tough. And then everybody else after the talk was like, I'm so happy that you asked that. I was thinking the exact same thing. And then I was pumped. I was like, yeah, I'm so excited. I'm going to keep asking bold questions. So do you know after talks, there's like a speaker, and you kind of go around and everyone asks their questions. And they're asking kind of really stupid questions, like, how do you like working at Facebook, right? Like, that doesn't actually help anybody. So my turn comes to ask a bold question, and I go, Deb, can I interview for you? And she goes, yeah. And she gives me her email right there on the spot, and everyone looks at me with this like awe and amazement that I asked, could I just have an interview? And she said yes on the spot. Because I just asked. And everyone was like, oh, can I have an interview too? But it's just like one of those things where you don't actually know until you ask. So if you aren't comfortable asking bold questions, I get this a lot, I recommend prefacing that with, can I ask you a bold question? And it actually helps to lessen the pressure of like something crazy is coming, and then you get someone's permission and you invite them in. So now I ask bold questions all the time without the preface because it gets a lot easier the more that you ask. And so another example is at the end of every interview, I usually say, we've been talking for 30 to 45 minutes. Do you have any concerns about me in this role? And people look at me like, no. Or they'll look at me and say, well, you might have missed some conversation about metrics. We didn't actually have time to talk about that. And I'm going, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you brought that up. Let's talk about it now. Or you might get a junior PM and they're like, I have no idea, blah, blah, blah. So, but the very small percent of time that happens completely outweighs the positive effects that just asking and getting that feedback on the spot really helps with. So now I'm going to tell you another life-changing secret. You ready? So I was reading this book called Feminist Fight Club, which is all about women empowerment, office politics, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a section called What Would Josh Do? Right. And basically, to paraphrase the entire section, we all really don't know what we're talking about. We're only sharing the current experiences that we have, which is why as product managers, it's really helpful for us to really get empathy for our customers so we understand and can articulate other people's experiences because of our own lived experiences. Does that make sense? So that person who sounds really, really smart in your office is just sharing based on their own experiences. And they say what they think is true, they say what's the best thing at the moment, and then they adjust as needed over time. So this is my husband, and he happens to be named Josh. So I ask him, I go, do you not know what you're talking about all the time? Do you just say stuff and like you just adjust over time? And he goes, yeah, of course. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? We're not actually speaking up. You get to speak and just say all the things that you want, and I'm just being very, very like detailed in my head about what's the perfect thing to say. We don't need to do that because we all don't know what we're talking about. So this is pivotal for me. I have, and I'm sure many of you have experienced imposter syndrome, and it was incredibly liberating for me to hear that we're all just making it up as we go. Because we can't predict the future, we can only test. We can only say what our experience is and test those hypotheses out. And everyone should say the things that are in their experience because your experience matters. So, step 3. Now that you know the lay of the land and you know how to unlock doors and opportunities, what happens when you're on your journey and you run face first into a glass door? How do you pick yourself up when something inevitably goes wrong? So most of us are probably not early career. We've had a couple of years of experiences under our belt, and when you start to get responsibility, that burden becomes even greater. So I'm obsessed with Brené Brown. Anybody else? Yes, awesome. And Brené says that when you're daring greatly, when you're doing things, failure is inevitable. So what's most important here is expectations. Expect things to go wrong so that you aren't surprised when they do. You're going to make mistakes, and the people that you work with are also going to make mistakes because we're all testing our theories out, we're all hypothesizing and checking that against reality. So I took on a risky role, and my worst case scenario happened. Totally fine. I failed and got fired and worked in really toxic working environments. But one thing is you can always fail up, right? How you talk about your failures, you talk about the data, and you talk about your accomplishments, as well as have confidence. So again, books help me out here. So I read Daring Greatly. Highly recommend that you read that as well. But also Rising Strong. So Rising Strong is specifically when you fall face down in the ring. She calls it the arena. And helping to separate the actual event of what happened and the shame that comes along with that event is incredibly liberating because it helps to remove some of the emotion out of it and helps you to make logical decisions. So what also helped me tremendously was talking things out. There's a couple people in my life. You've already met my husband, Josh, but also I have a friend, Sophia, who I talk to all the time. And we talk for 5 to 10 minutes just on our commutes when I'm walking to work or she's driving to work. And I highly recommend that you find that person for you, whether you find them here at this conference or anywhere else, whether that understands what it's like to be a PM. Because PMs, this is an incredibly unique job in like the grand scheme of the world, right? And so if someone really doesn't have that shared experience with you and really understand, there's a lot of context that you can't really explain. So I recommend you finding that person that you can both vent, share different perceptions, practice for upcoming conversations and interviews, and really understands PM life. So 15 years ago, I was a temp. I'm on a Vespa in Italy, by the way. That's me just being weird and a dork. People asked me earlier, where am I? What am I doing right now? 15 years ago, I was a temp. And over the years, I've been studying to be a product leader, learning how to open doors for myself, and trying to rise strong when I failed. And it's made all the difference. So I share my story with you, not to, I'm super exciting and super amazing, but it's for you to be able to rise in your careers more quickly, easily, and elegantly. Want you to be able to have the impact that you'd like to have and achieve that goal that you imagined in the beginning of the talk. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions?
Where did you get your CS degree outside of California?
University of Maryland.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was your criteria for kind of figuring out what you wanted to study or which schools to narrow down for?
I knew that I wanted it to be CS because it's just like the widest known in general. I happen to be from Baltimore. So I know that University of Maryland has an amazing computer science program, and they just happen to have like a really great online program. But I did check like Oregon, and I just stacked ranked all of them in a spreadsheet and did a due diligence and pros cons list.
There's always the idea of PM being technologically illiterate versus fluent, and I was just wondering kind of what your mantra was.
My mantra is I try to get as much information as I possibly can. And for me, I taught myself to code a long time ago, but there was a fundamental gap for me somewhere in my learning, right? And I literally tried every single online class there was, and I just like couldn't get it. And so for me, it's like making sure they had a solid foundation to then be able to say, oh, this is how we build technology. And that knowledge continues to evolve as I like change domains and all sorts of things. Yeah, of course. Questions? Yeah.
How important as you moved up your products was that business versus technical knowledge, right? At what level would you say like the technical knowledge translates to capacity or
Yeah, that's a really great question. So what I found is that I highly recommend What Got You Here Won't Get You There, if you haven't read it already. The technical is very important on the ground. And when you start to get into like a managerial position, it's still really important because then you're needing to be able to advise people, but sometimes you're making decisions through this very, very filtered view, right? And for me, I have mostly worked in developer products, so that technical never goes away for me. I think it just depends on your domain. Yeah, that's a good question. Any more? We can get personal. We can I really want to be able to help you guys here if you want. We're all family. No other questions? Yeah.
Probably a friend's question. That person's not here. She is a product manager in a large enterprise software company. She was telling me that she had this meeting with a group of people, and this senior developer pretty much had a meltdown and yelled at her, in front of all these people.
Yeah.
She was majorly embarrassed.
Yeah.
And I don't think she had an answer of how to deal with that. She was so angry that she just was still fuming many, many days later.
Totally.
So I wonder if you have a solution I can bring it back to her.
Yeah. So that has happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to many of us where it doesn't necessarily have to be a developer, but I actually had a program manager. So I was leading an engineering team, and we had this big initiative. And she's new to the company, so she didn't really understand what this team had gone through, right? And she kind of came in and said, you don't know what the priorities are. What are you guys doing? And I'm sitting there like, what? I'm the product manager sitting right here. I know exactly what the priorities are. But I think the book Crucial Conversations is incredibly important. So to me, what I did in that situation was I say, okay, thank you so much for that. Maybe there's something that we can actually talk about offline. You kind of diffuse, right, for that moment, keep it together, and then you have an actual really hard conversation offline, right? There's another time where, I'm sure your friend got really upset. Sometimes some water streams out of your face, right? Super great trick is to take your tongue and put it to the roof of your mouth and look up so tears don't trickle down your face. I learned that from Grey's Anatomy. It really works. It actually really works. But the thing is that you diffuse the situation there, and then you actually start asking questions. I'm curious about why you're saying that. I'm curious about, is there something that I'm missing? Maybe we should talk offline. And you handle it in the moment really gracefully, and then you actually prepare offline a crucial conversation, which that book, again, has completely changed my life. I'm like, there's clearly some kind of mutual purpose that is being missed, because we're all trying to do what's right for all of our companies. We're all trying to like make a difference and make impact and pay our bills, right? Of course. Yeah.
How do you, it can be exhausting sometimes being like the only person advocating for yourself.
Yeah.
Trying to grow. How do you deal with that exhaustion?
How do you deal with the exhaustion of self-advocating constantly?
Yeah, sometimes there's wine involved. But I think that you have to do it purposefully, right? So for me, so earlier in my career, I was just like, oh, I just want to rise, I just want to get higher, right? And that can be completely exhausting, right? Because you're kind of just like, throwing spaghetti at the wall, is that the saying? Yeah, you're just, right? And so until you actually map out what you want to do and where you're trying to go, you can then direct very clear-cut efforts into very specific things that you can actually move forward. And sometimes the answer is you got to just get out of the company and just go find a different team or find a different role, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes that is really the answer. And it's much easier to do it in a different company with a supportive environment than fighting your way. Life's too short.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Other questions? I'm happy to keep going. This is fun. No? All good? Awesome. Thanks, everybody.